Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one-stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sofia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. This episode is sponsored by Big Tech's Ordnance, your soon-to-be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high-quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre- and post-sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their own staff to train with high-level instructors to ensure that when you call as the consumer, you are taken care of. Today, we have Chuck Haggard of Agile Training and Consulting on the show. I am so excited for this one. I had the pleasure of meeting Chuck at the Mountain Man Medical and ConcealCarry.com Guardian Conference. This past, was it August?
September.
September. Okay. Thank you so much. Yes. And I got to take a few courses by you. I had such a great time. So I would love for you, Chuck, to introduce yourself to the speakers, if you don't mind.
So, Chuck Haggard, my side gig, my personal gig is Agile Training and Consulting. I started doing that in 2015. Late 2014. I had retired from my first job after 28 years as a law enforcement officer, and I had been getting more and more. Sorry, my cat is deciding to be very vocal right now.
No worries.
So I did 28 years as a cop at one job, retired from there. And during that time, all of my training had been either military related or police related. And I had basically trained in those two envelopes, and the vast majority of that being police. And then, and now the ambulance is driving down the street.
I feel bad for anyone listening while they're driving. They'll probably think that that's around them. So
my running joke is when you hear the siren in the background, I gotta go. That's my ride.
Right. That's really good. I like it.
So I had gotten more and more requests to do training outside of the law enforcement field. I really got introduced to that by being a presenter at Rangemaster Tactical Conference. Previously, one of the things I did on the side was National Law Enforcement Training Center out of Kansas City. I'm a national trainer for them, but all of those classes are law enforcement instructor trainer courses. So we create instructors on a wide variety of topics, anything you would think of to do with arrest and control, handcuffing, ground fighting, batons, pepper spray, things like that. So I'd done that for a couple of decades. I was an adjunct for Strategos International. That started out as the original Surefire Institute and then turned into Strategos International. Worked with those guys. Mostly what I did was active shooter response instructor level training, and then low-light instructor courses, and did that for quite a while. So, but like I say, all of that was either police or military clientele. And then through Rangemaster, Tom Gibbons was gracious enough to invite me to teach at that August event. And that means it's a really cool event, not in August, for people who are vocabulary challenged. So I was asked, hey, what about this? What about that? And so I actually feel like I've been a little bit typecast as of late. Like I'm the snub revolver and pepper spray guy. And so I'm like, I used to be cool. I did 18 years on a SWAT team with a very, very high operational tempo. I can log more than 2,200 high-risk warrants that I've done in my life, barricaded suspects, a couple of actual hostage jobs. I've been involved in guarding every president from Reagan to Trump before I retired from that job. So done some cool stuff in my life. Got asked the other day, do you do carbine classes? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, but the thing is, everybody does carbine classes now. I do have the advantage of about 47 years of experience on the AR-15, M16, M4 platform. So I got that going for me. So since then, I retired, took another job. I worked at our airport, which was a police and firefighter gig. So I had to be certified as a firefighter, air crash rescue specialist on top of everything else. Left that last year, and I'm a part-time deputy and a part-time police officer for 2 agencies in my area, along with the training that I do on the side.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. This has been the most exciting, I think, introduction in a She Shield episode that we've had in a long time, between the cat and the sirens and your extensive background. So thank you for explaining that. You very much are cool. And I will say the first time I heard of you was when someone kind of said you were the father of pepper spray, like pepper spray training, kind of like Gregor Mendel and genetic style comparison. So that is how you were introduced. But obviously, looking into you, I read a lot more about your background. So thank you so much for sharing that. All of that to say, we have so much we get to talk about in this episode, and I'm so excited for that. Just during our pre-chat show, I mean, there's already a lot that came up from that. So thank you so much for coming on today, Chuck. I'm so excited.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. So the first thing I would like to ask you is, how has your training in law enforcement and military applied to civilian training? I know it's very general, but take it however you want to.
So my military time, my dad was a Korea War vet, Vietnam vet, Camp Harry shooter, taught me how to shoot a rifle really, really well. Wasn't a handgun guy. So I was in the service at 17, and then I started running into stuff like I did really well at the rifle range. And so, I'd run into stuff like Sarge is like, hey, Bob is having trouble qualifying. Go over there and help him out. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Go shoot his target for him? I don't, like show him something or whatever. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Like I could shoot well, but I didn't know why I could shoot well. And I certainly couldn't, 17, 18-year-old me didn't know how to impart that knowledge to other people. So I decided the first chance I got, if I was going to be tasked with that, I should start learning something about it. My first legit instructor level class was later. I had joined the police department, been through the academy, been on about a year and a half. I had a chance to go to the NRA law enforcement because they have 2 programs. They have the law enforcement, non-law enforcement. Most people are more familiar with the non-law enforcement courses. Well, their law enforcement back then, it was revolver shotgun because that's what cops carried was, wheel guns, and holsters were made out of leather. There was actual dead cows involved in this thing, that sort of thing. So, that was that week-long course, and I'm like, I'm an instructor, right? So just from that week-long course, I got the idea that I still had a lot to learn, and that has been something I've talked to people about ever since. That you can go to an instructor course and have a shake and bake certification. Doesn't really make you competent, doesn't make you really conversant in the many things that you need to be good at to do this well. So I had taken advice from a lot of people over the years and tried to remain a perpetual student throughout my life, so that always trying to move forward, always trying to improve, always trying to improve the state of the art. Just because something's older doesn't mean you necessarily throw it away or it's bad or anything like that. There's a lot of stuff. Nowadays, there's a whole lot of like, shut up, boomer, or you're a FUD, that sort of thing. And there's a lot to be learned from the shoulders of the giants that we have been privileged to stand on, who in many ways back in the day had to make this up as they went along and take the hard road and discover, have a lot of failures and things like that. So have tried to remain Yeah, perpetual student. I tell people all the time that it's kind of like water. If you're either moving or you're stagnant. We know what happens to
Mm.
stagnant water. You get that
Yes.
film on the top, and the algae grows and things like that. So don't want to turn stagnant and then putrid. That would be bad. So, uh, and then like I said, throughout my law enforcement career, I was involved in my department had 300, depending on manning, and with retirements and hirings and things like that. We had about 325 people carrying guns. We were responsible for our own officers, and then other people like our arson investigators on the fire department were law enforcement certified. So they did the use of force and firearms training with us, even though they were actually, fired. They belonged to the fire department. And then we had a regional academy, so we had other departments sending their officers to our academy to do the initial certification of going through a recruit academy, as you do at the beginning of your career. So that led to me being involved in, I was an adjunct firearms instructor for my agency, but I was much, much more involved in the hands-on part of it. I joke with people that I can teach anything between verbal judo and sniper rifles, because over the course of my career, I'd worked with all that. I
Right.
was much more heavily involved in the use of force stuff and all of the things you would think of in arrest and control, like how to handcuff people properly, how to, do control holes, how to work in a ground control or, ground fight, um, uh, utilizing batons, utilizing pepper spray, tasers, things like that. So that's how I got involved into the pepper spray thing. Was about 1988. My department got involved in trying out pepper spray for the first time. I was sent to a instructor course, and I do the air quotes because it was a 4-hour sales pitch from that manufacturer on how great their product
Mm.
was. And then we all got sprayed, and then we had a really bad decon experience, and we were instructors.
Mm.
Yeah, just because the certificate says you're an instructor doesn't mean you really are, or that you know anything about that particular subject matter. Not all instructor certificates are created equal. But at any rate, we had a very, very high crime rate. We had a lot of crime in my city, unfortunately, back then, and that's during, if you remember your history, when like Boys in the Hood and Colors and a lot of the movies were coming out. It was kind of like that in real life. So
Mm.
my city at one point in the early 90s had a higher per capita crime rate than Los Angeles. So we did a lot of police work back then.
Wow.
Um, and because of the concepts of, everybody thinks de-escalation is a new thing. It's not. The police field has been doing that for over 150 years. And then things like in 88, when we got pepper spray, it was because back then cops had fists. You could talk, you could punch people, you could hit them with a big stick, or you could shoot them. And there really wasn't anything between, kind of low or really high. So pepper spray was an attempt to bring a tool to the arrest and control field that would de-escalate through a correct use of force at the time, a scenario that might turn into a brawl, or somebody's getting hit with a nightstick or something like that. So, yeah. If you want to talk about that a minute, that's one of the concepts I try to get across to people, and this applies to both cops or anybody that is in this field of self-defense, personal protection, things like that. And I'll ask you, if I use the word de-escalation, what do you think that means?
I would say to, like, if I'm defining it, to decrease the likelihood of a violent outcome.
So most people think it's
And
like endlessly talking nice. Like I'm going to
oh,
talk nice,
okay.
and I'm going to talk nice a lot, and maybe I'm going to give you a hug and a bunny, right?
Mm.
Uh,
Hmm.
I would submit to you that when it is time to take action, that talking isn't going to work or hasn't worked. that the correct use of force competently applied at a low level early often saves you from having to use more force later to dig yourself out of a hole.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Okay.
In the law enforcement field, and this is stuff you can look up yourself, in the law enforcement field, the most glaring example I can come up with is the Deputy Kyle Dinkheller incident that is pretty famous in the law enforcement world. And what happens is there's a confrontation after a car stop. Words are exchanged, and the suspect ends up going back to his pickup truck, retrieving a rifle, turns into a running gunfight, and the deputy loses the gunfight, ends up dead. So there were several points in that encounter where the deputy could have taken more decisive action. Physical force, pepper spray, tasers weren't really a thing back then, but nowadays, if you had a taser, utilizing a baton, something like that, where he could have ended this encounter at a use of force, at a use of physical force, and he didn't. So the whole thing turned into a gunfight that was avoidable. Not speaking ill of the dead, but it just is what it is.
Right.
I was actually getting a debrief on the George Zimmerman incident this morning, getting some details on that case because I don't like to misspeak on my facts. And excuse me, I've been fighting a sinus thing for a few days. Kind of a Socratic question here. Knowing the facts of the case, and most people do, have some version in their head of what happened, but you have George Zimmerman, you have Trayvon Martin. There's an altercation between the two of them that eventually results in a fatal shooting where Trayvon is dead. George Zimmerman's arrested for a homicide case. I'm pretty sure the DA's office knew that they weren't going to be able to win that, but it is a thing in the legal field. One of the phrases that I've heard numerous times in the past is the process is the punishment. So I'm gonna make you go through a homicide trial that I know I'm probably not going to win, but now you're, let's say 500,000 in the hole on legal fees. You've been arrested, et cetera, et cetera. So the process is the punishment. So we know George Zimmerman was found not guilty of the murder, right, by a jury of his peers, that it was a self-defense shooting. Now, let's say we back that up and we put George Zimmerman in one of my classes that you've seen my managing unknown contacts, utilizing OC spray. So if George had those tools and that training, and when it turned into a disturbance of verbal altercation between the two that was about to turn into violence, if George Zimmerman had pepper sprayed Trayvon Martin, backed off, called 911, what are the odds that we would ever have heard of George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin?
Very low.
You wouldn't know those names because it wouldn't have been a homicide that turned into a murder trial. It ended up in the media, everything else. It would not have been the event that it turned into. So if you can avoid that kind of drama, why would you not?
Absolutely. And as far as the legal ramifications of that goes, is there any downside to using something early? Could that be argued in a court of law that it's too early and there was maybe malintent? I'm not sure of the proper legal terms here, but is that something that you talk about in your courses as well?
So in any use of force, you have to make the right decision. It has to be reasonable under the totality of the circumstances at that time. You don't get 20/20 hindsight. I don't, as a cop, I don't get to punch somebody in the face and put him in handcuffs and then run him for warrants and be like, oh, he's got a felony warrant. That doesn't justify it after the fact. That isn't the way any of this works. Right. So, people, and officers have, Fourth Amendment search and seizure and a lot of stuff that other, non-cops don't have to worry about. There's a lot to be aware of there. So in a simple self-defense, scenario, what's your understanding of when can, because I know that you carry a firearm, so when can you
Mhm.
utilize your firearm in self-defense?
Ooh, so
I'll help you out. When you're in reasonable
okay.
fear of death and or great bodily harm.
Oh, okay. Yes,
So that's
yes.
when,
Okay.
so how high is that hurdle? How high a hurdle is that? Is that a lot of articulation to be able to justify potentially taking another human life? Have you ever
Yes.
been in a situation where you thought dude was about to maybe snatch your purse or punch you in the face or some other thing that really didn't rise to the level of deadly force, but you're like, I think I'm
Yes.
about to be physically assaulted, or they're going to try and steal my purse, or whatever the case may be. So, do you believe that that's a much lower hurdle of justification?
Yes.
So, that's when we can utilize physical force, which includes tools like pepper
Hmm.
spray to defend ourselves. And then the other thing I point out
Right.
with it's a much lesser justification. It's much easier to
Hmm.
articulate a reasonable fear of a physical assault. I'm about to strong arm robbery, purse snatch, something like that. So it's an easier hurdle. And then what's the
Hmm.
ramifications of utilizing the lower level of force? Nobody's going to the hospital. If you utilize deadly force, somebody's probably at minimum going to the emergency room. Maybe they're dead. Maybe they
Hmm.
need surgery. Maybe they're crippled for life. We don't know. But the ramifications of, let's say for the sake of argument, that you sprayed the wrong dude, like you're like, man, I totally messed that up. I misjudged the situation. Um, I thought the guy was going to, I don't know, grab my purse and run away with it. And he was trying to hand me a religious pamphlet. So, legal jeopardy there, in most of the jurisdictions I've looked at, would be you would be guilty of a simple assault. If you go to the judge and you're
Okay.
like, my bad, I totally screwed up, that sort of thing. And then quite frankly, one of the things I like about pepper spray is that most people don't look at it as being, what do? You get washed off, you feel miserable for a couple hours. It's a done deal. It's like you get a take back, my bad, which you can't do with bullets or knives and some of the other tools that people
Right.
carry. So you can come up with, and I don't mean come up with, but I mean, in most scenarios I've seen where people are in reasonable fear or something, the level of articulation that they were in fear of a physical assault, a purse snatch, being punched, that sort of thing is a much lower morally, legally, ethically, it's a lower hurdle than going to deadly force. So the whole idea that, the old saying of, if all you got is a hammer, then you got to treat everything like a nail. And if you've got
Mm,
nothing between harsh language and a gun, then that's a pretty wide void.
absolutely. It's been something that I've been integrating in all of my basic pistol courses, just because these are people who are coming in and they've never shot a gun, and it's always, I want to learn how to protect myself. So we talk about mucking. Of course, I don't teach it officially. I'm not certified, but we go into mucking and we talk about pepper spray and try to broaden their view, because I'm not gonna lie to you, the first time I'd ever considered the importance of carrying pepper spray. So not just carrying it, right? So I've always had one on my keychain, but the first time I really looked into it was after seeing a post by Tessa Booth, and um, she she mentioned training with it, and I remember thinking, training with it, like it's pepper spray,
It's a can, you
and then
spray
I
it. What else is there?
exactly, and I started YouTubing like how to deploy pepper spray properly, and I was like, oh my god, there's actual steps to this, um and then I used a inert canister on my husband when we were dating at the time, so he still married me, so that's a good sign. I got to use that on him, and he came running at me, and it actually freaked me out a little bit, and I actually like freezed up a little bit, and of course I started moving, but I remember thinking like, wow, this is just the guy I'm dating. Like, what if this was a stranger? And it all kind of just came to fruition. And then, training with you, I even got nervous in your class. I was like laughing while pepper spraying this guy out of, nerves. And it just goes to show how much I've just like learned over even this short period of time. So I'm really glad we are discussing this today. And part of that question was for a lot of the comments I get on my page about pepper spray, and people talk about how they say things like, if you're using it too early on, couldn't that be used against you in a court of law and stuff? So I'm really glad we're going into the legal side of things. That's really great.
One of the common sort of like, I don't know, we there used to be a derogatory name for that when you were in the Army, and it had to do with bathroom lawyers, but it was much less polite language. And people come up with this contrived thing of, well, if you got the pepper spray and then you have to shoot the guy, they'll say you should have tried the pepper spray first. No, it's absolutely ridiculous. There isn't this stair-step approach that you have to do. So, you're going to not carry pepper spray because you're afraid that it's absolutely ridiculous. There's literally no case law on something like that. There's no cases like that I have ever seen where any of that. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if you have any kind of expert on your side, they'll be able to make hash of that very quickly in court if it were to come at that. I would argue that if you're running around with nothing between harsh word and a gun, then are you telling everybody that the only thing you're prepared to do is kill people? So that's my other side of the coin on that argument. I think it's a dumb argument, but we have two, and I hate the term tactical toolbox because it's so overused, and people will fill their tactical toolbox with, cheap tools that break from Harbor Freight. And that doesn't make any sense either. But pepper spray is a tool. Physical force is a tool. If you've got jiu-jitsu, things like that, guns are a tool. They're completely separate tools, and they're utilized in very different scenarios. And I would argue that realistically, what people face when they're thinking about street violence or street encounters, that the pepper spray is going to be vastly more useful, vastly more often. I can tell you my police experience. I don't have hard numbers, but extrapolating my use of force reports and the data we had from my department, I've pepper sprayed somewhere between 300 and 400 actual bad guys on the street. Because we had we arrested a lot of bad guys. And one of the things they wanted us to do was utilize it early. And the phrase that I picked up from another trainer was take the fight out of the fighter. So what would be a brawl, you go to lay hands on a dude and he wants to fight. And then part of this is the psychology of that. There's a lot of dudes, if you go to lay hands on them to put them under arrest, it's like they're, screwed up moral code that they have requires that they have to fight. They have to put up a show for anybody watching. So they're going to fight the police. And there's a lot of things like street cred and that sort of thing involved. Whereas if you give somebody an out, like, hey, if you don't turn around, put your hands behind your back, I'm going to pepper spray you, I'm going to taser you, I'm going to hit you with this big stick. Well, then they can talk a bunch of smack. Like, they'll allow themselves to be handcuffed and then the whole way back to the police car. Well, I would have kicked your ass, but you had that stick, you had that taser, yada, yada, yada. Okay, whatever. If that's what it takes for you to save face and we're all going to go to jail, I don't get hurt, you don't get hurt. Okay. So what we found early use of pepper spray was, and it's rough numbers and it would vary from year to year and that sort of thing, was about a 90% reduction in bad guys going to the emergency room during a combative arrest. Because typically we'd spray them they would be very debilitated by the spray. We muscle them into cuffs. We take them to jail. We get them washed off. We get them booked in. Done deal. They didn't go to the emergency room. And the thing is, I didn't go to the emergency room. So you're doing some jits, right?
Yes.
So what would you say if I invited you to a class and when you showed up, I didn't have a dojo. We were going to do jujitsu in the parking lot.
Oh, I would on it. So I've actually, sorry, I'm laughing at this memory. When I was in high school, I was training for my black belt in a Korean style martial arts, and it actually wasn't your typical like cash. What do they call it? A McDojo. It was legit.
Yeah.
My instructor was a scary dude. He made us work. We were sweating profusely by the end of training. We trained on Saturdays. I worked 7 years for my black belt, and the grandmaster came down from Korea and tested me. Does it apply to street stuff? Not as much. But one day we took our training out into the pavement. And because we had one student that was like, "Ugh, I'd be fine." And he was like, "Okay, let's test this out." So we went out to the pavement, and oh my God, it introduced so many other variables. The pavement was so rough on our feet. There was like broken glass somewhere we had to watch out for. There were no borders, we said like, don't go beyond this or you're in the street itself, with the cars. But oh my gosh, it introduced all these new variables that we had never thought of before. I don't know if that is kind of where you're going with that.
What do you think would happen if you started grappling on the pavement?
Oof. Yeah. Skinning.
Yeah, the answer is everybody's getting hurt. And
right. Yes.
So I haven't done this. I can tell you that things that I would like to avoid, and when I suggest pepper spray, I suggest tools. I've seen a couple of reactions. One of them is a silly ass idea. Like, have you seen the t-shirts that say "not a pepper spray kind of girl"? And got like a picture of a Glock on it or something.
No, but I've seen I don't reload, or I don't call the police, I reload, like some just BS. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But I've seen dudes get kind of, like I've challenged their machismo. Well, I don't need pepper spray because I've got, whatever, boxing, Muay Thai, jiu-jitsu, whatever, combatives. Okay, so do I. And what that's gotten me in real world fights is every once in a while covered in somebody else's blood. So I have been confirmed exposed to things like hepatitis B. One time I got done fighting a guy, got him in my car. We're driving to the jail, and I have bugs hopping on me now. So,
oh my goodness.
I ask people all the time, when they're talking about this, would you walk up to the average random homeless guy in whatever city you can think of and just walk up and give him a big old hug? No. I can see the look on your face, right?
Yeah.
So do you really want to grapple? Do you want to exchange bodily fluids with that person? None of this is a good idea. So, yeah, what I found is like grappling in the real world isn't as comfortable it is when I'm in the mat room. Or, if the better you are or the worse you're going to get hurt and things like, there's all these variables. But if nothing else, you get skinned up and then you got somebody else's blood on you. That's a problem. And I can tell you, like being treated for 6 months for hepatitis B, hoping my last blood test comes out a big negative. That's kind of a big deal. That's kind of that makes an impression on you. So I ask people all the time, why would you do that if you did not absolutely have to? Not by choice, but I mean, you are literally forced into doing that because it's your only choice. So, yeah.
Wow.
Well, yeah. And what we found in the police world was, and this holds multiple jurisdictions, which is a wide variety of training quality of product, things like that. But about 80-90% of the time, OC was what was considered to be effective in that you didn't have to use a higher level of force, result of something else to get somebody into handcuffs. So I would argue that's pretty successful. In the non-cop
Absolutely.
world, I believe it's a better idea, because what you don't have to do that I had to do was I had to walk up and lay hands on them and try to put them into cuffs. Whereas
Mhm.
average Earth people can spray the bad guy, back off, call 911, whatever the case may be. They don't have to make physical contact. So as a tool of disengagement and deselection, and frankly, de-escalation of a potential scenario, it's a really good tool.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for going into that. I have never heard that perspective. I mean, I'm I'm like almost thrown off my path here. I had some questions and I've never thought of that. I've literally never thought of that. I feel almost silly for it. I've talked to people about how just blind I was before about a gunfight after I went to, ECQC by Craig Douglas. And I know I almost mentioned this in every episode, just because I'm trying to get this concept out there. I've only ever been to one, and I've been to other, weapons-based entanglement trainings, but this was the one that really turned the corner for me, because I hadn't considered the 0 to 5 foot range and like, is it even a good time to pull my gun? But this is something that stretches beyond that. I mean, um, not even wanting to get close to, a particular type of person and having to get down on the pavement and applying pepper spray to that. So thank you so much for going into that detail. And there were a few things you mentioned that I would love to dive in with you over, and that's tasers. And you didn't mention this, but knives as a form of self-defense. And
So
I used to,
I'm gonna hit you with
yes.
another rhetorical Socratic question. You've been to
Okay,
ECQC.
please do.
You know,
Yes.
when you get to you're in your fence and you're to the point of back the F up, right?
Hmm.
What are your
Hmm.
options at that point? And I know Craig, I've done ECQC. Craig teaches like an eye jab is one of those things, right?
Hmm.
So putting my
Right.
Star Wars nerd hat on, what if I could teach you to use the Force and you could eye jab that guy from 10 feet away?
Mm.
If I could teach you to do
Yes.
that, you'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to that class, right? Well,
Absolutely.
that's
Yes.
basically what OC gives you is eye jab in a can 10 feet away. So when you put it in
Yes.
that
Makes total
perspective,
sense.
when I
Hmm.
ask people if I could teach you the Force and you could poke somebody like the Three Stooges in the eye from 10 feet away, would you take that skill? And every time they're like, yes, I would, you know,
Right.
and so that's basically what you're accomplishing.
Absolutely. It's like a real life Call of Duty perk
Mhm.
almost, but applied to real life. It's bad. Sorry. I don't really play Call of Duty that much, but that's what I kind of can compare it to. No, that's so good to know. That's a great point.
So you
There's a lot
were
of content ideas from that.
you were talking about the
Sorry.
knife thing. That's something I
Yes.
see, and I've carried knives. I've carried knives since I was a
Okay.
kid. Um,
Okay.
I grew up in a time where dads carried pocket knives. That's a very rare thing
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. So, and I've
Mm-hmm.
carried a knife defensively for a whole lot of my life. Carried a knife defensively in places that I could not have a gun, like in another country. Uh, and, before concealed carry existed, before I was a cop, places that I was, deployed for training in the military, that sort of thing. So yes, but I see a lot of people when they lay out their little EDC kit and their nightstand pitcher, things like that,
Yes.
and they'll
Yes.
have like a gun and a knife and whatever, something else like a nice watch. Uh,
Hmm.
and I'm like, okay, so you got deadly force, you got alternative deadly force. That's what you got. You don't have anything within a range. I think the switched on people, you'll see like a gun and a knife, some sort of flashlight, and some OC. You got a wide
Hmm.
range of scenarios covered. As you know, if you've been in the ECQC, that the ranging, that knives work really well and guns work really well, uh, doesn't have a whole lot of cross. And obviously, knives are a contact weapon, but at grappling range, a knife is probably a better tool. I mean, if we were going to do gladiator combat and do a fight to the death, if I was going to be locked in a phone booth with somebody, I would probably choose a Bowie knife over a pistol. But
Okay.
is that really a realistic scenario?
Right.
So if we look at the dynamics of street violence or home defense, things like that, typically the handgun becomes much more useful. And then one of the things I caution people about is, how does that everything you do, you're going to have to explain to somebody, and how is that going to look to a jury unless it's the most extremist thing that you found yourself caught up in, right? I could tell you, like, a lot of laws, we're in concealed carry culture somewhere between 2.0 and 3.0. A lot of people don't know that. Concealed carry actually started in the late 1800s. And my state in Kansas would be an example of that. A lot of our laws on things like unlawful use of a weapon, and for many years, Kansas did not have any, there was no legal concealed carry unless you were an active duty law enforcement officer, period. Even retired cops couldn't carry a gun. And if you looked at our laws, guns were, if you got caught carrying a concealed pistol, it was a misdemeanor, class A misdemeanor. But there was a lot of other stuff that was listed as unlawful use of a weapon, that, like, saps, blackjacks, dirks, daggers, Bowie knives. We must have had a lot of Bowie knife fights back in the frontier days because those were specifically mentioned. But dirks, daggers, slingshots, saps, bludgeons, all of brass knuckles, all of this stuff. If you got caught with that, it was a felony.
Wow.
So why would that be? Well, if you look at when concealed carry culture started, we came out of the Old West, and then it was considered to be, it was unfashionable to carry a big cowboy gun belt. So gentlemen wearing suits in the city would start carrying a concealed pistol. And that was very, very common. The Ivor Johnsons, the Smith & Wesson concealed hammer revolvers. John Browning made a big chunk of what he did was like Colt 1903s. He invented the 32, the 380, the 25 ACP. The little baby Browning 25 ACP was a vest pocket pistol. Who wore vests? That was three-piece suit stuff, right? That was bankers and lawyers and that sort of thing. But if you caught somebody, if the police back then caught somebody running around with a dirk, dagger, brass knuckles, who was typically carrying that stuff? Undesirables,
like
thugs,
gangsters,
that sort of thing.
Right.
So the law was actually written, the laws back then were actually written to sanction that undesirable element of society harder if they got caught rolling dirty. A lot of people don't know that. So, and then the societal attitude towards things like stabbing people is pretty visceral. Like, oh my God, that's a pretty savage thing. You could legally, in my state, carry a tomahawk for self-defense. You could just run around with a tomahawk for self-defense, the way the law is written now. But can you imagine having to explain why you tomahawked a dude?
No.
Like, you did what?
Right.
You did what? So at any rate, I caution people in the jurisdiction that they're in, kind of the tone of the area that they're in, that sort of thing, to really think about what options they're carrying. Now, I carry blades daily, carry firearms daily, but I can tell you what, the wheels have really fallen off the cart if I'm resorting to a knife. Things are really in extremis. That's probably not going to be my first choice. Not against it. I've done a lot of training. In fact, I've done a lot of one of you were talking about other martial arts. One of my gurus was had his own art. So Mike Inye, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He's passed away. But his art was Cadena de Mano. So I used to drive down to Wichita and train with Guru Inasanto, or not Inasanto, Inye, and Inye was partnered up with Inosanto for a long time, and with Roger
Okay.
Carpenter, and we would go. We had Fight Club. We would do grappling and knife fights and sparring and all kinds of crazy stuff back then.
Wow.
So I know quite a bit about it. Know quite a bit about traditional Filipino martial arts, having done that for quite a bit. But um, to quote Master Inosanto, we had a officer involved shooting, where one of our officers on the street shot a dude with a knife, and it was a big blow up in the media. Well, why didn't they, all the stuff like, why didn't they just shoot him in the leg, or why didn't they do this or that? Why didn't they disarm him? Which is really complicated when the other dude has a knife. You're gonna get cut up. So I asked Mr. Inosanto what he thought, or I keep doing that, man, and Mr. Inye what he thought, and he goes, "I'd have shot that dude." So yeah.
Yeah.
So even a Filipino, a legit Filipino grandmaster was like, yeah, if I'd had a gun, I'd have shot that guy too.
Okay.
So when we find bang for a buck on tools and things like that, I think we really got to look at what we're carrying, how we're training with it, things like that. So that's a very long-winded answer.
Oh, I'm so glad you explained all of that. One of the first guest speakers to come on was Craig Douglas, and actually, he was the first guest speaker of She Shield. And I asked him what he thought of, or if he could place kind of weapons like gun, pepper spray, knife, taser in kind of a level of like of a force continuum, and explain that force continuum. And I didn't really like know what I was talking about at the time. I still don't. I'm still learning so much. But that was the first time I was opened up to the idea of like when it would be appropriate to deploy any of those. And I still like to ask this question, and that's the most depth I've ever gone, or I've ever, heard anyone go into when it comes to knives and the force continuum. But I still feel like there's a major gap in the industry. People aren't talking about this enough. So I'm really glad you're talking about that. And I would love for you to talk about tasers and what your thoughts are on civilian grade tasers, if you don't mind. Is that something that you would feel comfortable speaking on?
First off, get some mythology out of the way. Nowadays, it's become common to anything that is electric. People call it a taser, and they apply that to these dumb stun gun devices, which are, a small box, maybe about the size of a cell phone. You push a button, it's got a couple of electrical arcs or a couple of probes, and a little lightning bolt will jump back and forth, and you have to actually touch somebody with it before they're gonna feel the electricity. Those things are less than worthless. They literally do not work. They do not work on people the way movies would have you think. They don't render people unconscious, anything like that. It's like somebody walked up and gave you a big pinch or a horse bite. So people jerk away. They tend to flinch away from it, but its use as a tool is, I would say, is less than worthless. And the reason for that is people buy these things and then they believe that they have a defensive capability that they do not actually possess. So another rhetorical question I talk about in class is, let's say I gave you a gun, Sofia. I just gave it to you. I told you, don't mess with it. It's loaded. Use it if you need it. So you get yourself into a scenario where you're like, I think I'm gonna pull this gun and go ahead and I'm gonna try and shoot this guy. And so when you pull the trigger, instead of it going bang, it's like one of those Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd guns where the little bang flag pops out the front. Do you think if you tried that in the middle of a scenario that might get you into trouble?
Oh, absolutely.
So
yes,
that's what I talk about. A glaring example of, you thought you had a defensive capability that you did not actually possess. So you got yourself into a scenario deeper than you could get yourself out of. So stun guns will do that because they're utterly worthless. Not only that, it's when you zap people, and a lot of people are scared to death of electricity. when you zap people and induce pain, that induces adrenaline dump, what most people think of as fight or flight response. But it's much more complicated than that. It's fight, flight, surrender, freeze, posture are all on the table. So let's say you zap your bad guy, you cause more of an adrenaline dump on them. Along with adrenaline, you get enkephalins and endorphins, which are morphine-like painkillers, much more powerful than heroin. That's what gives people. You ever heard of runner's high? That's enkephalins and endorphins. Excuse me. So, do you think it's a good idea to induce an adrenaline dump on your bad guy and then not do anything effective in controlling their actions or anything like that? So, stun guns are not tasers, and they're utterly worthless. And the other thing we know about this is tasers can be used in two modes. One of them is you fire two darts that come out of the magic electric pistol, and they make contact with your bad guy. And the other one was what Taser calls a drive stun. So you're actually pushing the end of what you would think the muzzle end of that into the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And what we see in the law enforcement world is drive stun is less than worthless, tends to escalate the scenario. So like a couple of years ago when we had that, it was an arrest of a DUI suspect on a Wendy's lot in Atlanta. It turned into an arrest the guy resisted arrest. One of the officers tried to use the taser on the guy, and he was using a drive stun. Well, that made the guy fight harder. And eventually you have one officer with a concussion. You have another officer disarmed of his taser, and the whole thing turned into a shooting that never should have happened. So, excuse me. So I think drive stun's less than worthless. Often it exacerbates the situation. Now, tasers can be very, very effective if both probes connect. You don't have a dart wire disconnect. And you're at a distance where the probes are spread enough that you have a sufficient muscle mass activated that you can induce. It's kind of a sort of a paralysis to your bad guy. What the taser does is send the electronic signal through your muscles that mimics the same signal your body sends to make that muscle contract. So, like the first time I got darted was an instructor class, and they shot it from behind because they're worried about eye safety, that sort of thing. So the low dart hit me in the glute. The high dart hit me at the top of my lat. That made both of those muscles contract. You ever had one of those wake up in the middle of the night Charlie horse calf cramps where you're hopping around trying to stretch it out? So that's kind of what 100%. A taser does to you in the muscles that are activated, is like a big Charlie horse calf cramp sort of thing. So think about it. My glute and my lats are activated. I'm like almost bent over backwards. The safety guys grab me, lay me on the ground. But as soon as that 5-second ride was over, I jumped back up. It doesn't induce an unconsciousness. It's not debilitating. In fact, I jumped up mad. Like I wanted to fight. I had a good adrenaline dump off of that. I was still hooked to a taser, and the guy holding it, the taser instructor was the chief close combat instructor for the Marine Corps at the time. So I'm like, well, maybe I'm not going to pick a fight today, Hans was a bad dude.
His name was Hans?
Yeah, Hans Marrero.
That's made up. There's no way.
He's a real guy. But at any rate, so what we find is if the darts aren't separated enough, you don't get that debilitation. And if it doesn't have enough motor muscle mass, like we started seeing failures on the street where guys were like getting shocked, for want of a better word, but it wasn't putting them on the ground. And what we find, like at close range, if you don't have enough dart spread, like I have been darted in training where I got one in my pec and another down in my abs. Well, my legs are unaffected. It hurts. It really sucks, but I can walk up and lay hands on you, and I know because I've done it. A lot of suspects have done it. That's something Craig and I have talked about. Craig has replicated that as well. So, we wanted to know why tasers were failing. So there's a lot of ifs. There's a civilian taser out there. I forget what there's two different models. Or the older original one and the newer one. I think it's called the Bolt. But at any rate,
Yes.
They're out there. The last I looked, there's something like $800-900. They're a single shot, and then the theory of that is you hit them, it cycles for 5 seconds, and then it goes to a slow cycle for 30 seconds. I have found playing around with one of those that the 5 second is just as debilitating as the law enforcement model. But once that slower cycle, it's supposed to keep your dude on the ground until you get away. So with the slower cycle, I can actually, I'll walk like Frankenstein, but I can actually do things like get up. So if you have the means to buy one and train with it and realize the pluses and minuses of the system, I'm not the guy to tell you not to get one, but the magic electric pistol has induced a lot of poor decision making in the law enforcement world. So that's my caution right there.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. When I started my page, Taser, actually, the brand Taser, for anyone listening doesn't know, there's a brand named Taser that sells tasers. Good on them for marketing. But they sent me I believe it's the Bolt. I need to check.
Does it look like a pistol, or is it shaped like a banana?
It does. It looks like a pistol.
So the original one was shaped like a banana, kind of like one of the versions of the old like 1960s Star Trek phaser. It was kind of like that.
Yes.
So if it's the pistol, that's the newer one.
Yes. And the banana shaped one, I had that because my dad got me one in college before I got into concealed carry, and, just doing the dad thing, like doing what he thought was best. And he obviously didn't have this take. And then they sent me the Bolt, and I did a short video on how to train with it. And then I can't remember who I talked to, but who was it? They originally opened me up to the idea that the civilian grade tasers aren't actually that great. And it got me thinking. And then I since just haven't touched it, haven't wanted to promote it because I didn't know enough about it. For someone like me who has access to this, and I'm going to regret asking this, but would you recommend that I actually try it, get shot with it? I do have a few cartridges. Is that something that you think is worthwhile to?
It's a weird experience. For me, it's kind of like first time I got hit, it was kind of an out of body experience. I'm thinking, I'm looking around, my muscles don't do what I tell them to do. You could taste, and this was the old M26 and they had a different pulse cycle. Like I could taste the ozone in the air, from the electricity, kind of that. If you ever spark tested one of those, you ever smelled that kind of electrical smell in the air? That's kind of the ozone getting burned up. I could taste that in my mouth when I got tasered. So it was kind of different. I advocate for that for law enforcement officers. I think cops in the academy should take a taser hit. They should get pepper sprayed. Part of that has to do with realizing the effectiveness and the limitations of the system, and then also being able to articulate things like that in court. So I've been tasered. I have been darted with a taser 7 times now. And I mean, if it was going to give me cancer or something like that, I'd have it by now. But so I would say that that's a very personal decision.
Okay.
I would tell you that I would probably talk to somebody who's a trainer in that. And initially, Taser was very kind of flippant about people got darted in class in demos all the time. And the last time I went to Taser instructor school, they weren't darting the instructor candidates, which they were before. And then if you wanted to do a voluntary exposure, they had, I don't know, it was a ridiculous multi-page waiver that they wanted you to sign before they would agree that that was a good idea. So all of these things are very personal decisions. I'm going to just leave it at that.
Okay. I appreciate you explaining that, truly. I was just thinking while you were explaining, like, have you heard of, his name is Robin and his handle is Dutch in the USA?
I have not.
Before. So I met him on TikTok. He's in the millions. He has a couple million. And I've been trying to get him to come on the podcast because what he does is he takes the everything from window breakers to tasers and stun guns that are being sold online and now on TikTok Shop, which is scary. But anyway, he'll order them and then test them on himself, or he has like I think a group of people that help him film, but and he's debunked a lot of these products. And I've always thought, like, should I do that? Is that something I should, start bringing to my page? And now that I think of it, my family does have a history of heart problems, so maybe I shouldn't, but it is something to think about. And I just thought I'd see what you had to say about
tasers
that. I'm really glad we've talked about this.
Tasers are very safe, and they're actually very cardiac safe. But taser will caution people. There's a reason why they tell you don't aim like right for the mediastinum area over somebody's sternum, things like that, because I guess there's a potential for, it's one of those, it's kind of rare, but it could happen sort of thing. So that's why I tell people don't be willy-nilly with this sort of thing. If you decide, well, I want to get tasered or whatever the case may be, because it's just like with the pepper spray, it's a can, you spray people with it. What else is there? Now there's a lot to learn about some of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I think that's a really healthy disclaimer, especially to say on here, where I'm not recommending anyone does that. I think Dutch's videos are great though, his channel and things like that. Have you seen also, I didn't plan to bring this up, but now that we're on the topic, have you seen the especially marketed towards women self-defense keychain sets that are being sold? You can get them all in the same color. It's mostly on TikTok from what I've seen, but it's usually specifically a stun gun, pepper spray. Don't even know what the, is it capsaicinoid
Capsaicinoid
I never know how to say that. Content, yeah. Yes. I don't even know what it is. When I went to their website, it didn't even say what it was. And then a stab tool that looks like a pin that hangs down from your keychain. And then it'll come with like a little puffy. If you haven't heard of this, I'm so sorry to be introducing you to this because I wish I could unsee it, but it'll come with like a little furry keychain thing as well. And then you end up with this keychain that's like, I don't know, as big as a purse, essentially, of self-defense tools. Have you seen that circulating around?
I have not seen that, but I have been very I've been disenchanted with the entire industry of stuff that is women's self-defense. I have daughters that they're in their 30s now, but as a dad with 2 daughters growing up in their teens, things like that, I taught them about pepper spray, how to use pepper spray, victim deselection. I taught them some hand-to-hand stuff, things like that, age-appropriate stuff. And then what I saw paying attention to these tool industries is how much garbage that is marketed to women. And I can tell you that I was offended by proxy that they think women would be stupid enough to, okay, here's a pepper spray, but we're going to put rhinestones on it, or we're going to paint it pink, or, whatever the case may be. And hey, buy this thing. And then the vast majority of this stuff, like some of the stun guns and some of the off-brand pepper spray that I've seen, is just garbage. So you're really setting women up for failure. You give them a tool that really doesn't work, but it's kind of blingy. So it's this simple-minded marketing that, they're preying on the fact that people maybe don't know what they need to know to utilize these tools or to make good. So that's a big part of and you've been to a minimal part of my OC course. There's a reason why I talk about what to look for in making your purchasing decisions on self-defense tools. Be that pepper spray or some of the other stuff that's out there. So yeah, Ned Evans and Ned Evans is a friend of mine, on her own is her page. I don't know if you've ever talked to Annette, but, we have talked about things like, the classic, put the keys in between your keys and your key ring, put the keys in between your fingers, and then use that as some kind of like punching tool. We talked about that. I have invited ladies to punch me with those keys, and it literally does nothing. One time at Rangemaster TacCon, I brought one of my blocks of ballistic gel, one of my big ones, and she was scared of actually, and it can happen if you got keys in between, you can split open the web of your hand if you go to strike something and your keys injure your hand more than the bad guy. So I was doing punches into the block of ballistic gel, and it was literally not leaving a mark on the ballistic gel. I have invited people to like, here, go ahead and like punch me in the chest and see what happens. And it's not, it's absolutely ridiculous. The tools and the concepts and things that they try to sell to ladies. It's horrible.
Absolutely. And it's also perpetuated by positive reinforcement. I was listening to a podcast episode. I listen to a lot of true crime. I've mentioned this on the podcast, and I don't care what it says about me. It's my guilty pleasure. And people write in to these particular podcast networks, and they talk about these bad situations they've been in that, could have turned worse. And this one story in particular I'm thinking of, this girl talks about, walking to her car and, she's almost attacked. And she mentions, but I had my keys between my knuckles. And the podcast hosts were like, yeah, go girl, like good for you. And I was like screaming in the car, not really. But I was kind of, of course I'm by myself. So I'm like, what the hell? But it's almost reinforced by women when they do practices like that. So it's not talked about that it's actually not helpful. And I'm this close to buying one of those keychains and just messing with it and showing how dysfunctional it is, how it's not helpful. And these videos go viral. And of course, when oh God, it's perfect marketing. Even during Christmas time, I always resupply my family with palm pepper spray. That's like one of my stocking stuffers for them. And I feel so good when I give them pepper spray. And I make them go through we do like a little mini course. And I like scream at my sisters and have them raise their voice back at me. And, we have fun with it. And they always end up hugging me and, laughing, but I'm always like, okay, no, let's get serious. Anyway, but I feel so good when I can do that for them. And so I know people buy these gifts and buy them for themselves, and they feel very little buyer's remorse because they're doing something good with it. Anyway, so I almost want to duet one of those videos with this segment from the podcast and just like put those side by side because it's not talked about enough. So, but yeah, and speaking of industry items that maybe aren't the best, I remember in your class, and if this is not something you want to go into right now, that's totally fine. So just let me know. You mentioned the potential hazards of the leather back holsters. So the ones that have am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah. Okay. So not a fan of these. Yeah. They're typically referred to as a hybrid holster. Vast majority of the ones I've seen, people carry typically at 3 or 4 o'clock, behind the hip, strong side hip. Of course, opposite if you're a lefty. But I have seen, the top brands in these style of holsters become blatantly unsafe with very minimal use. And as an example, I was helping Tom Gibbons teach one of his famous handgun or his Rangemaster instructor courses, and it was late summer in Missouri, western Missouri, warm, humid. We had a guy with a brand new holster. It was one of the hybrids, so it's got the leather backer and it's got the Kydex outer inside the waistband. And not a fan of the brand, not a fan of their marketing, not a fan of their reach, and not a fan of that type of holster construction. So this guy actually had bought himself a new holster of this style just for this class. So halfway to lunch, about 2.5, we'll call it 2.5, 3 hours of work in, excuse me, on an outdoor range in Missouri. This holster had become sweaty and broken down and was actively unsafe. So we had to tell him, you're not going to be able to continue the class with this holster. He ended up with a loaner. Fortunately, he was carrying a Glock, and, there's, kind of a dime a dozen on holsters out there. So we had a loaner holster for him, and he finished the class with a loaner holster. So one of the cons of those holsters is that leather backer that goes against the body will start to flex and start to break down. And as you go to holster your pistol, there have been documented cases of those grabbing the trigger and torching the gun off, particularly if you have a striker fired semi-auto. We know that those can fire. They don't have a hammer. Excuse me. That's going to be a theme tonight, I fear.
No worries.
So at any rate, you can fire a striker fired semi-auto inside a holster without, any movement of the gun. There's no hammer, cylinder to turn, or anything like that. So the other problem with those type of holsters is they typically have very poor retention. And, as you know, like you've been through ECQC, if you're doing any kind of grappling, the gun just flying out of the holster is a thing. And then a lot of them use subpar attachments, like really poor. The clips are just not a good design. So I've seen in those types of combative scenarios where the gun is in the holster and the whole mess comes out of the waistband and ends up on the ground. So yeah, there is a number of very popular holsters on the market that I think are absolutely unsafe. And then people continue to buy them because they're comfortable. So they're pretty comfortable.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. A few of those I've actually tried myself. And as I've learned, I've started steering away from those. And I really love being able to, I teach a course right now called like concealed carry techniques basics. So like the very like foundational, layers of starting to conceal a handgun. And there's an hour of lecture before we get into it on this topic. And yes, I did see that actually at ECQC. We had a few holsters break. And Craig will just take a picture of it and post it on Instagram and tag the brand and be like, this broke, So, but no, my Filster Enigma was spot on. It stayed in. I loved being able to test that because I've been posting about it so much, and it's not, necessarily, field testing, but I did get to put it to that test. And I've put some other holsters in the industry, and I think we're talking, I know what brand you're talking about because we've talked, off recording, and I've definitely trained with one of the holsters you've mentioned, in a little bit of, weapons-based grappling, and some of even the positions I got into where I had to pull. So I'm thinking of a time I was training with a training partner, and I actually bridged up. So I had my feet on her. So I was kind of posting with my feet, and I bridged up to draw my firearm and dropped my hips. And that way I could present the firearm through my legs. And I remember having this particular band on, and I had to like come up really high. And that was a lot harder than pulling from inside the waistband, at my like hip level, waist level. And that's something I would have never really experienced had I not done that. So all of that to say, I I value your opinion very much because you can present that side of what really happens when you're fighting over the gun, or you're fighting with the gun. So thank you for elaborating on that.
Oh,
Because
we
that's
kind of
awesome.
dodged around a little bit of that, but I'll tell you the holsters I outright
Okay.
endorse include, like, you've worked with the Filster Enigma. John
Mhm.
is I've known John since he was bending kydex in like a very cracky neighborhood in Philadelphia. And very happy to see his success. But he's a practitioner. He's a shooter. He has trained with Craig. He's done ECQC, things like that. Another friend of mine, who's also friends with John, is Tom of Dark Star Gear. So another shooter practitioner. And then, although I don't know him, the fellow that does Jam Custom Kydex, those guys also train with Craig. They're shooters or practitioners. So you will see the way some of these holsters are designed is influenced by the fact that the people making them have a fairly extensive experience in use. There's a lot of stuff in the gun world that is designed by engineers or whoever that don't actually really shoot or utilize the product or utilize it in a manner that consistent with what you would want it to be able to do in like a combative scenario or something like that. So when I tell people to shop for holsters, I'll tell them, look at Dark Star Gear, look at Filster, look at JM Custom Kydex. Tenacore is another good one. If it's outside of that, I'm not going to say don't buy it. And I'm I still enjoy a good leather holster. And then there's good practitioners out there. Milt Sparks as an example, but specifically Dark Star Gear and Filster, I endorse those and highly recommend those to people because I know those two dudes. I know their work ethic. I know what they put into the product. And then, that they actually walk the walk. They don't just talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I remember the first time someone mentioned to me that uh, some of these brands aren't actually owned or researched or elaborated by people that shoot, and it was mind-blowing. I was like, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. And it's so true. And if the listener, if you're listening now and that's a new concept to you, it is so true. And the deeper I've gotten into the industry, which I feel like I'm still just floating, in the kiddie pool area still, but the more I see that, it's very interesting and it's very real. So I appreciate you calling that out. I think that's awesome. And that's what this podcast is for. So super exciting. While we're on the topic, again, this isn't even something I really plan on going into, but I'd love for you to address, if you don't mind, if you have the time, to off-body carry. Just while we're
So
on
I
it.
think there's a place for it.
Okay.
I think there isn't one answer for everybody.
Right.
One of my friends works in a very professional environment. And then she is able to, because of her mode of dress and the job she does and things like that, she comes and goes from the business, and then she can do something like go to where her desk is, lock her purse in her desk with the gun in it, and then do the things that she has to do with that particular job. I have known people that had, because of the expected dress code of their profession, that it may be that you have to wear a suit and tie, or you have to wear scrubs, or you have to wear technical clothing. Maybe you're working in a lab, or you're working in an industrial setting with certain PPE and that sort of thing, that you have different parameters that you have to deal with. I've known people to very successfully manage purse carry, ankle carry, some sort of deep cover on inside the waistband, pocket carry, and then the off-body carry is often a method that people utilize to have it with them, but they can't because of the nature of their work. And maybe I'm not talking about flouting the law and getting yourself arrested. I'm talking about not making your boss mad, or not, Cecil Birch actually talks about that. His career has been in white collar stuff, to where if you blow a 6-7 figure deal, is that a problem? If you off put a client because they figured out that you're wearing a gun because he had it very poorly concealed, is that, you just blew a 6-figure deal. That is a big deal. So when we talk about some of the things that Cecil and Daryl and I talk about in our NPE class, non-permissive environment, we talk about the sanction might not be legal. It may be negative to your employment, or whatever the case may be. So off-body carry, I've known a number of people who can manage off-body carry, laptop bag, computer bag, purses, things like that. And then what that allows them to do is it a perfect solution? No. Are there downsides to it? Yes. But can they have something to where they can come and go from their work, and they don't have to, I got to take my gun off and then, go through all of the drama of dealing with that. So I think, depending on one's lifestyle, it can be a very workable solution for your reality. That's one of the things I noticed about the industry is there's been years of people telling people, well, if you don't have this, if you're not carrying a 45, then you're going to get killed in the streets. If you're not carrying this, you're just not taking this seriously. I think there's a place for 22s and pocket 380s and snub revolvers and full-size service pistols and optics on handguns and things like that. And it's not my place to tell you which of those. So I can advise you, like if you were asking me, hey Chuck, should I, use this gun? One of the first things I start to do is query, well, what are we trying to accomplish here? So one of my mentors, Pat Rogers, famously told people all the time, mission drives the gear train. So am I a SWAT guy? Am I a lumberjack? Am I a military operator? Am I doing infantry work? Am I a doctor? Whatever the case may be. Those are vastly different fields, and they have different needs, that sort of thing. And then I would not profess to tell you that you should carry, absolutely, you have to carry this gun, any more than I would tell you what outfit you should wear, because clearly in the second instance, I am totally out of my level of expertise there. So, and I find in the ladies' world that just like how ladies dress has a lot to do with accessorizing, that you can get away with maybe a big gun and a small gun and then a plethora of holsters. And it may be a purse day or an enigma day or a belly band day or whatever the case may be, depending on what you have to wear for the circumstances you're going to find yourself in.
Absolutely. I love the way you answered that. Not that I was looking for a right or wrong answer, but I recently made a video, I haven't released it yet, on fanny pack carry. I don't know about you, but like every few posts has been about fanny pack carry. And it's a kind of a sensitive topic, I feel like, right now, because a lot of people are pulling fanny packs from like Shein and Amazon and, from sellers anywhere in the world with potentially low quality fabrics. And in my opinion, there's a list of criteria that the fanny pack has to meet in order for it to be deemed safe. That's like the only extreme I fall on. So like, for example, having a separate compartment for the firearm away from your chapstick and your wallet and your, lady products.
So not bagging on the ladies, but another one of my mentors, a very famous dude, is a legit Vietnam War hero. Him and his wife were both officers, and I'll leave it at that because I don't want to
Okay.
they've told this story, but I don't want to like publicly embarrass anybody. But
Okay.
husband, uh, the wife did a lot of undercover work, and then the husband was cleaning his gun because they had to go to the range and qualify. And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to clean my wife's gun too. You know, I'm going to be nice, clean my wife's gun." Took her gun out of her purse, and there was an eyebrow pencil down the barrel. So that's a potential for literally blowing up the gun if you have to pull the trigger. Um, and it's people don't know what they don't know, but yeah, having the gun sequestered from I have seen quarters jammed into guns. I have seen incidences of pocket carry and bag carry where the gun fires because there was nothing that kept access of pressure away from the trigger guard. There's a lot of things to think about. You can't just stick it in a purse, or, you know, whatever, gym bag, whatever. Um, and can you get away with it? Yeah, but we have a lot of what Claude Werner calls negative outcomes from, you know, people shooting themselves, shooting other people, kids getting killed, that sort of thing. So didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah,
Oh
so
no, it's
I
fine.
am old enough
Yeah.
to have used fanny packs when they were cool and then been berated for using them when they were no longer cool. And now they are cool again. So yeah, I was wearing a Hill People Gear fanny pack earlier today.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay. Does it? I've actually never heard of the brand. Do they have a separate
Yes.
compartment for the
Yeah.
firearm?
Hill
Okay.
People Gear made their bread and butter. Have you ever seen the kind of chest packs guys will wear when they're out in the wilderness? And it allows you,
Hmm.
let's say you're fly fishing or whatever, and you want to carry a gun because you're worried about bears, that sort of thing. Well, if you're wearing a pack or certain outdoor gear, you can't really get to a waist mounted gun, right? Or it's going to be covered up by other gear. So they made their bread and butter early on with this chest pack sort of thing. And then it branched on to all sorts of outdoor, which you would think a lot of people would think of as like hunting, mountain gear, search and rescue people buy their stuff. And they make a really, really nice fanny pack. So yeah, I was wearing
That's
a fanny
awesome.
pack earlier.
Oh, that's wow. That's so cool. Okay, good to know. And yeah, that's so funny. I did when you said that I thought about this fanny pack that my dad gave me one time when I was in high school, and I obviously didn't tell him this. I was like, "Oh my god, thank you so much." But I remember thinking like I'm probably not going to wear this. Like this isn't like in right now, but yeah, now if you go into Walmart or even just on a little, on a walk in your neighborhood, everyone has a fanny pack in some way or another. And even like Vertex just dropped their new fanny pack in collaboration with Lena, and um, that's one of the first that I've actually felt safe concealing with. I've rigged a few of my own, but I took all of them to the range not too long ago to just see what my time was, and also to see to film myself and see like where the danger spots are, like when I reholster, like what's the safest way to do that, and to include that in the video. And my goal in this particular video is just to talk about the potential hazards of it. So of course, like we're flagging more because we're reholstering across our body and not in front. So I go into that a little bit, but I have noticed that there are so many people in the industry, and I'm noticing this more and more, that speak in extremes and try to say that, you know, inside the waistband carry with the Filster Enigma is the only way. And I'm not gonna lie, for a while I just felt safer being one of those people because I was getting a lot of comments, if I carried it an alternative way, and I just wanted to get away from that. I almost felt like I was kind of like forced into this corner because I wanted to avoid the internet warriors. And I got to a point, and this is almost embarrassing to admit, where I just wouldn't carry if the Filster Enigma didn't work with my outfit, because it doesn't work for everything. Um, and maybe that's just a training gap I have. Like, that's something I need to work on. But I now have like 3 methods that I kind of go between, and I end up carrying most of the time, like 98% of the time, because of that. So I like that you said that, because it means a lot coming from you in the industry. I don't have the experience you do in training and real life. So yes, anyway, all that to say, thank you for explaining that. Would you, sorry,
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, I think it's a real
Mhm.
problem in the industry when people get, well,
Mhm.
you have to, if you don't do this, you're going to get killed in the streets, right? Or if you do
Right.
this, you're just not taking it seriously. And I've spent a
Mhm.
lot of my life wearing body armor, wearing guns, being very, very tactical. And I want to ask people, I'm like, do you never like take a vacation? Because every once in a while you need to wear, board shorts and flip flops or whatever, right? Um, so, I would argue, well, if you don't go grocery shopping with your plate carrier and your carbine at low ready, you're just not taking it. Where's the cutoff? It's somebody has drawn a
Right.
line in the sand and they decided this is the only, whatever. Uh, the I and not knowing the history of it, I see people on the internet give a lot of people a whole lot of crap about it. A lot of people know Claude Werner as the tactical professor, and he is famous for
Mhm.
carrying things like 22s and snub revolvers and things like that. But most people don't know that, well, at one point he was a Georgia State IDPA champion. He was a special forces guy, so he's an operator. We had a talk about a home defense plan. He was overseas and in a place where he had a potential, because this is the time of the Red Brigades, like when General Dozier was snatched, and there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. There was a potential, if he got made, he could have a team of dude with ski masks kicking his door in, right? So Claude told me at one point, with the gear he had available, his home defense and evac plan involved dumping a military CS grenade in the apartment with his gas mask on, and then leaving through the cloud of tear gas, and then shooting every terrorist he came across on his way out, knowing that the place was going to burn down because of the nature of those munitions. So I would argue that if your home defense plan doesn't include burning the house down on top of the bad guys, maybe you're not taking it seriously enough. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, we could
Yeah.
we could go to
Mhm.
ridiculous Walter Mitty extremes with this sort of thing. Things that I know to be true, like with Tom Gibbons' students, I think he's got 70 cases now of successful concealed carry, legitimate defensive shootings. Police investigated, goes to court, the whole bit. 70 of them. He's had 0 losses. He's had 3 forfeits. And what do we mean by that? On the day that it was their selection by a violent criminal actor, those 3 people got caught without their equipment, and they were murdered during the course of a robbery or, carjacking, etc. So what does that tell us? That everybody that had a gun won, none of them lost, and everybody that got caught without a gun died. So that tells us we need to carry your gun. Carry your gun. Notice I didn't tell you to carry what gun.
Any
So the
type
vast majority of these
of gun.
scenarios, if we have people who are competent, you can solve a lot of these problems with something as mundane as a 5-shot snub-nose 38. And in fact, some of the most experienced people I know a guy that's 33-year veteran, overseas service with the CIA, and he carries snub-nose revolvers. That's what he carried. Ed Lovett, who famously wrote the Snubby Revolver Handbook, was over 30 years as a CIA guy, overseas a lot, doing real world James Bond stuff. And the vast majority of the time, he was carrying a Snub 38 revolver. That's what the agency was
Wow.
issuing. So is the software much, much more important than the hardware? Now, I'm not advocating.
Oh, I
People are going to
mean,
listen to this and go, Chuck's telling everybody
right.
to carry a Snow-Nose 38. I am
Right. No.
not. But the
Right.
first thing you got to do is the rule 1 of a gunfight is have a gun. have a gun.
Right.
So if you have to downsize your gun or change your gun or change your carry mode so that you can make sure that you have your gear, your emergency rescue gear with you in an emergency, then that's what you should do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. It is invaluable. We need more Chucks around. So, this is part one. We just had a little chat about this. I am going to have Chuck back on the podcast for a part two, specifically to go into home defense. Chuck, would you like to kind of say a little bit about what you do with home security training?
So I look at it as a layered approach, and it's not just a gun thing. How to look at your property, read where the danger's at, how to harden, how to have a layered approach. If you think about in the olden days with the whole castles, they had a moat and a drawbridge and a wall and a tower. So that would be a layered defense, so that if one fails, then you've got a fallback.
Absolutely. Well, perfect. We will plan to talk about those layers in a part two. So if you're listening and you're excited for that, this is a perfect opportunity to subscribe to wherever you're listening to She Shield. Turn on your notifications, because Chuck will be back for a part two on home defense. In the meantime, Chuck, I always ask my guest speakers this: is there anything you would like to send the listeners off with?
So I think I hit on those big points. Carry your gear. Software is more important than hardware. Not everybody's answer fits your reality, that sort of thing. So those are kind of big concepts there, but they're principles that I find that hold true.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that also just speaks to me as an instructor. I just want to say this, and when I've been teaching, the more I learn, the less I speak in extremes. Of course, when it comes to safety, things like that, all about extremes. But I have a lot of people ask me very particular questions, like, when drawing your concealment garment, should your hand be like this or face down? And I get into more of a discussion with them about it than I do give them just a point blank answer. And sometimes, especially when I started doing this, I started to feel almost less competent. Like, oh, are they going to see me as someone who doesn't have an answer for them? But at this point, I feel like the discussion is more important than anything, and like having them come to their own conclusion about their life, how they carry, and also what type of concealment garment they have. Are they carrying outside the waistband with a flannel, or do they have, inside the waistband, a simple t-shirt? I think there's something to be said about that. So I'm glad that you came on here to share that perspective, and thank you so much for your time. I know I've had you on here for a while, and I've held you hostage long enough. So thank you, Chuck. And I will have this full video on YouTube. This is probably number 4 or 5 to be released in full video form. So I'm so excited about that. If you're interested in that, please check out the YouTube channel. It is linked in the show notes with the link tree. We'll have shorts available on She Shield Instagram and TikTok at She Shield Pod. All of the resources mentioned in this episode that Chuck mentioned, the holsters, everything like that, will be linked in the show notes as well for your reference, and make it a little bit easier on your life. And if you liked the podcast, you can greatly contribute by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. And if you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis, please look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization that will connect you with a local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm or an integral part of the firearm for you until you're ready to retrieve it. The link to access their website is also in the show notes. Thank you so much. In the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant.